This is the Westminster Standard Podcast. I'm Ryan Beasy. Welcome. Today we have Scott Cook, Doctor, PhD, James Baird, TE, and Ken Wojnarowski. Welcome to all of you, even those of you from North Carolina.
Good to be here.
Yes, so glad to be here.
It's great. It's a great day here in Sullivan County, Tennessee, though you wouldn't be able to tell that because we're broadcasting live from the Jude 3 Command Bunker here. Been on good behavior at the Sullivan County Correctional Center, so I got some bookshelves in my cell. But we're going to discuss the Christian Nationalism report, which just came out last week. It's a partial report of a study committee. Now, there's a lot of confusion and ignorance in the PCA about study committees. I saw recently that someone was accused of violating a study committee. Scott, as the resident expert on the Constitution and polity, can you help us to understand what is a study committee? What authority does it have?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. The answer is a study committee is something that gives you an opinion that an assembly can either approve or disapprove, but it is just that. It is an opinion of one general assembly. So in Presbyterian jurisprudence, we take the actions of assemblies, particularly with regard to its constitution, and we divide those into two categories. In theses deliverances, and actual constitutional binding actions or change constitutions are just the statements that express the sentiment of one general assembly and are not binding on anyone at that assembly or past or future assemblies. It's an opinion that is meant to edify the church and help people think through issues more clearly. The only actions that a general assembly can take that genuinely bind the church to obedience or its practice and faith are those that are changes to the Constitution, or when a formal judicial decision is made, future cases may appeal to those that are similar, but even still, the court has the freedom to determine future judicial cases. Precedent doesn't work exactly in our system as in the secular one. So when we look at a study committee, it is something that some will kind of more tersely say is pious advice. It is something that we should take with due consideration, but it's not binding at all.
It's not binding at all.
That's right.
It's good advice. Sometimes it's bad advice other times, but that's an important point that you make, that judicial decisions are binding on the parties, but not anyone else. There's due consideration that should be given to them by the wider church. But the General Assembly, through its study committees, has no authority to say this is how you must interpret the Constitution. Is that correct, at least in the PCA?
Exactly.
I know the Presbytery of which I'm a part has a view that is, you must hold, if you differ from the Westminster Confession in the meaning of in the space of 6 days to mean anything other than 6 days, you would hold a view that's out of accord with the Constitution, regardless of what some study committee paper lining a birdcage somewhere said at one point. Well, thank you. That's helpful. So as we consider this study committee report on Christian nationalism, the partial report, so we should assume that more is yet to come, that this is advice that church courts, sessions, presbyteries can use as they find it useful and disregard as they find it less than helpful. Does anybody have any general comments on this? Ken, you've been muted for a while. Did you want to say anything, or are you doing your best Little Mermaid impression?
Yeah, I just have a lot to say, and I was bridling myself, so I want to make sure that none of it escaped, right? Seeing that you're in a bunker prison. Is that what you alluded to? You're in a prison?
Someone said it looks like I'm in the Sullivan County lockup, so we're going with that.
In good standing.
not indefinitely suspended.
Not indefinitely suspended.
You know what? I will take first crack. I will go on record saying I'm not the first to say it, and I won't be the last. I'm not a big fan of study committees.
Thank you for that. James, I imagine you have some more loquacious thoughts, just in general, on this partial report. And bearing in mind that it's partial, it doesn't have any footnotes. It's meant to be very accessible and very surface level.
Mhm. Well, I'll start with the things that I like, especially like the first affirmation and denial. It's talking about the just authority the civil magistrate rightly has, and make sure to separate the civil kingdom from the spiritual kingdom. The denial is that we deny that the civil government can accomplish the redemptive work that belongs to Christ alone. The church, not the nation, is the primary community through which Christ manifests his reign in the present age. Civil government remains provisional, penultimate, and subject to divine judgment. I think that is exactly right. I also like the sections where they reaffirm what our standards say. So, for example, let's look at number 5. We affirm that the civil magistrate must maintain piety, justice, and peace according to the wholesome laws of each commonwealth and protect the church as a nursing father. I think those are two very important parts of chapter 23, and I'm glad to see the committee pick that up and reaffirm it. The civil magistrate isn't only responsible for justice and peace. Actually, its first duty is to maintain piety, and that it also is the nursing father from Isaiah 49:23. I think that is great.
I think that's something people often miss, especially those who may have been influenced by two kingdoms theology, whether through professors or their own reading, that the government, we confess, as the Presbyterian Church in America, is to promote piety. So, in that sense, would you say that it is contrary to the position of the Reformed Church, and in this expression, the PCA, that we should seek a spiritually neutral civil magistrate?
No, definitely not. I think this is very clear from Westminster Larger Catechism 99, where it is laying out the fundamental principles for the moral law, which is the Decalogue, all 10 commandments. And it's very clear that it's the duty of all people in all their stations and callings to be helpful to others in obeying their moral law duties, and ought to obey those duties as well. So I don't think that it is possible to say that there's one vocation you can have with a moral law and its full extent doesn't apply to you. It applies to all human creatures and all of their vocations exactly because they are God's creatures.
Hmm. So when did this, Scott? You're something of a historian and an apologist. When did this idea that the state should be neutral in terms of religion come into popular conception? Was it 1961, 1964, when school prayer was ruled unconstitutional? Where did we get that idea?
So that's something that you start to see develop in very broad terms from the Enlightenment forward. And what I mean by that is, particularly if you want to talk about the American context, we have a much more religiously colored and influenced past than a lot of other European nations. And so as you start to see the development of what we roughly call secularism in Germany and France and other places, you've also got to think about the socio-cultural context of all the wars of religion following the Reformation, various settlements, and then kind of this Aufklärung or Enlightenment mentality. Think for yourself, sapere audite, as Immanuel Kant says. Well, that starts to really generate a tradition of political thought that starts to liberalize and then eventually see the state as something that is separable from faith commitments as a way to protect people from intractable religious conflict. Here in America, you can start to see that roughly in the 20th century. Some guys will put it at different places. The question of school prayer is actually a very interesting one. I was reading Gordon Clark one time, who's not known for being a secularist, and he was actually glad that the Supreme Court struck down school prayer, because the prayer that was being used in many places, not in the American South per se, was a non-sectarian prayer where you were not allowed to pray in the name of Jesus because you had to be somewhat inclusive. And he and others made the argument that that's a problem. You also see J. Gresham Machen arguing that we shouldn't have public education. It should be private education all the way, and Christians, reform, should be able to have a robustly free commitment to our theological commitments as Catholics are to theirs. So it's complicated, but roughly when you start to see something like we think of as modern secularism, it's really in the 20th century that begins to progress. And as you start getting into the 70s and 80s, that's when you can really see people like Francis Schaeffer, the Theonomists, various groups of people, the moral majority, all kind of inveighing against secularism. So it's got some older roots, but generally, I would put it in our country as kind of the 20th century phenomenon.
And so our confessional document, our church, does not take a view that the state should be neutral or secular in regards to religion. If a person has that view, that would be a deviation from the standards, wouldn't it, Ken?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for the visually impaired people want to know your views. James, did you have any other points that you especially liked about these affirmations and denials?
Along those same lines, I like the affirmation 6 a whole lot. Right? It says, "We affirm that the civil magistrate, in accordance with the limits of his office, must seek to honor the moral law in the prosecution of his duties, according to the dictates of prudence and the needs of each particular society." I think that is spot on. I love it.
I wondered what it would mean for things like Sabbath breaking. That if as we confess as the PCA that the whole of the Decalogue is the moral law, even if it has civil or cultic applications, ceremonial. But
That's right.
That's what they're advising. That the moral law is the duty of the magistrate to enforce.
That's right.
But at the same time, not required to engage in legally mandated acts of Christian worship. And I think I see that as consistent. I didn't see a conflict there, that the magistrate's not required to, yank you by the ear to church, but he should at the same time send the state troopers to shut down your liquor store or your grocery store if you're doing unnecessary acts. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that that's exactly right. I also like the way that they phrased it. I think it's very accurate. It says, "We deny that the obedience of the civil magistrate must render to the moral law must lead the magistrate to require citizens of civil society to engage in legally mandated acts of Christian worship." It's stated very well. I think that is absolutely the case. Yep. So
Yes.
I like the precision there.
They were very clear, very admirable.
Ryan, you brought up state troopers and going into stores. I was living in a town that I saw the change of the law on Sundays. So you could not buy liquor on Sundays, and then it was changed to you couldn't buy it until afternoon on Sundays. And a lot of the older folks in our church, in our town, talked about how it used to be that the stores wouldn't even be open on the Lord's Day, and how that changes over time. And we actually just did at my church here, we did the Ligonier's Sabbath study. They have a 6 or 7 episode with Robert Godfrey on the Sabbath study. And he talked about
does he take the continental reform position on the Sabbath?
I don't have his views in front of me, but what I was going to say was he talked about a town in New Jersey that actually had a chain, that they would chain the road up so that no one could leave or enter the town. And this was not in the distant past. This is 15 to 20 years ago.
Based.
Wow. Yeah. Well, and I ask about the continental reform because he was the president of that seminary out in California for a while, and I don't see daylight between the Westminster Standards and the three forms of unity on the Sabbath day, but some people have invented such a position. Yeah, I think these are very well stated. Any others that you want to highlight as exceptionally good?
Yeah, I like in 3, we affirm the right of the institutional church to address civil government on all matters to which the Holy Scriptures speak. Right, we've done this. The PCA has addressed letters to the federal government, the local governments. We just did this with the transgender procedures. Was that 2 years ago? And I believe we did one with abortion as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
then the Supreme Court sent it back to the states, and many states outlawed it. We punch above our weight, as they say.
Yeah, what do you know? The Supreme Court listened to us.
Us, yes. I can think of no other explanation for the same.
Yeah.
Do you want to remind us, Scott, what does it mean, this humble petition in cases extraordinary? That may not be what people first think of when they read it. Is that correct? What does that mean? Cases extraordinary.
Yeah, so the idea is that you have two distinct spheres in life. You have the sphere of the civil magistrate and the sphere of the church. And obviously, the moral law is to govern both. The church has a spiritual end, the state has the natural end of providing for safety, the magistrate being a terror to those who do evil, rewarding those who do good. But then, if you think about this in terms of a Venn diagram, there's going to be certainly a large area of overlap where there's going to be things to which the church should be able to speak into. And that language of by humble petition in extraordinary circumstances is, I think, designed to do two things. Number one, to keep the church focused on not being a political entity to preaching the gospel, but that there are going to be circumstances in which we have to, as the confession and as this paper, I think, beautifully brings out, we're going to have to exercise, particularly the ministers, the prophetic office to which Christ has entrusted his church to speak out on issues, but that we should not be constantly getting involved in the matters of the state. But when there are circumstances, we must apply the fifth commandment, speak to our political superiors with respect, with the dignity due their office, but by way of humble petition, speak to the word of God and the bearing that it has. And I think some beautiful examples from the recent history of the PCA come on transgender ideology, come on abortion. Those are examples of us using that clause rightly. I was reading in another denomination's tradition, and in the 1960s, they were considering a theological position paper that might have some, appeals to the civil magistrate over the issue of fair housing and rent prices. And that's an area where I think the divines would say, hey, that's really outside of our lane. But in circumstances when justified by the word of God, we can, by humble petition in extraordinary circumstances, use our office to speak to the civil magistrate.
That's helpful, and to remind us to stay focused, not just stay in our lane, but stay focused. Right? These are supposed to be extraordinary cases because our main thing is the proclamation of the gospel, the discipling of the nations. And I think that's what the argument people made regarding mutilation of children, which was the focus of that statement. It wasn't even mutilation of adults. It was mutilation of children. We thought that is an extraordinary case where the church can rightly and humbly speak. Anybody else have any other affirmations or denials that you wanted to highlight as exceptionally good, or anything else on number 3, Ken?
I'm good on 3.
One thing I thought was good was on, let me see here, it was the one on liberalism on page 2711, affirmation and denial 11. One of the things I really liked about this, striking a balance by, on the one hand, saying that the liberal political order that we enjoy in America, and by liberal, we're not talking about progressive or political parties, we're talking about the idea of a free society where people are allowed to meaningfully engage in government, where there's a limitation on the power of government, where there's freedom of conscience, all those things that are kind of bundled together in the liberal order that we're talking about, maybe entering into a post-liberal phase with the way politics is operating in this country. I really appreciate how they brought out that we should be thankful to Almighty God for the freedoms and liberties of the church, and this brings out. And then when I got to the we deny part, this is where I was really wanting to give a test to see of the integrity of the document and the committee, because most of the time when people critique liberalism, it's from a position that is really opposed to liberalism, either from an authoritarian position or a Marxist position. But I thought this was a really beautiful, well stated, biblically balanced comment that says, hey, there are some forms of liberalism when put together with a highly individualistic, or I would say excessively libertarian format, lead to a very undercutting of morality in society. And the fact that they brought in the idea of an expressive individualism that weakens the family, church, and social cohesion. I mean, it seemed to me like that was an area where there's so many navigational buoys on the lake that you could run into, and they just seamlessly wove between all of these, saying we're going to thank God for the development of the Western political order that you can see flowing straight out of Scripture and the influences of Calvinism and other things. But we're also going to say there's an individualistic impulse that, when part of a liberal order, can be deleterious to the morals of a society. And I thought they really knocked that one out of the park.
It was very well balanced there. Any other comments on this number 11, affirmation and denial number 11? I thought they they addressed the concern that we often, and it hasn't been so much recently, but in a few months ago, it seemed like everybody was talking about either the Roman Empire or the post-war consensus, and maybe a little bit of obsession with the post-war consensus. But I think they engaged with that concern in a way that was timeless. That we need to be thankful for the liberal Western civilization that we enjoy. Which of course flows right out of Christendom, but also acknowledging that Western liberalism has had grave consequences, especially as it's been loosed from its theological moorings. James, anything? You seem to have something on the tip of your tongue there.
No, I'm just agreeing. I think you're nailing it.
Well, I think these guys have nailed that one at least. Any other affirmations or denials that you want to highlight as exceptionally good?
Yeah, I'll take 12 here.
Yeah, right there.
We deny the political solutions alone, whatever their merits, can address the deepest needs of our society or ensure the survival and progress of Christian values, institutions, or churches. The term Christian nationalism, you can say that, and it can mean, at least 15 different things, maybe. Depending
almost
on the
as
day.
many genders as there are definitions of Christian nationalism. I think.
Yeah, right. And tomorrow there might be 20. And you can say, well, you're clearly a Christian nationalist, and that can be a compliment or that can be a negative. This reminds us that the political climate is not going to be what matters, right? Right now, I am very thankful that we live in a society that is governed by laws. I do wish the government would enforce its laws more. That would be great.
Except for speed limits.
Yeah, well, yeah. But at the same time, I think it is important to stress that we are in some of the safest climates as far as Christianity goes than most of the world. And so while we are very blessed, I think, to have a government that even recognizes some form of Christianity, that could all go away. And yet we still have to figure out how to live as Christians in a world like that. And so it's, the climate is the climate right now, but if that changes, the statement reminds us that the political solutions alone are not going to solve the problem. Jesus is the one who solves the problem. The world needs Jesus.
I thought, what I wrote next to when I read this was, there's the trope, but it's a trope in the PCA because it's so common of progressives who just, they want to love people, places, and things to life. They want to love the city to life. They want to invite their unbelieving neighbors to enter in with them and join Jesus in his redemptive mission to redeem the city or redeem this neighborhood. And I thought this was a helpful corrective to that point of view, that Christ actually isn't all that focused on the redemption of neighborhoods. Maybe I'm wrong there, but I don't think Jesus died for neighborhoods. I think he died for people. And I remember being at a Presbyterian meeting years and years ago at the big, wealthy church downtown, and it was a meeting of the church court, and we had these people coming in who were concerned with, I think it was like Hamilton County Promise or something that was wholly concerned with the public school system in Hamilton County, Tennessee. And I thought, I don't care about this for a number of reasons. One, I live in Catoosa County, Georgia. And two, I'm a minister of the gospel. And three, what does this have to do with the mission of the church? Supporting and helping and augmenting the Hamilton County schools was irrelevant, I thought, to the mission that Christ has given to the church, and a distraction on a Saturday at a Presbyterian meeting. So I think this is a helpful corrective to that kind of overly focused view of over-realized eschatology that many of our progressive colleagues have regarding the work that's going on in the cities. Maybe that's just my bias. What did y'all think?
I have one more I really liked.
Which one do you really like? Get us out of here.
I really liked the fourth affirmation.
Affirmation numero fear.
Yep. We affirm that the historic Reformed tradition encompasses a spectrum of permissible positions with respect to the relationship between church and state. We welcome the renewal of interest in Reformed political theology and believe that the work of historical and contemporary theological reflection on this subject is an important part of the church's ongoing witness. It's very easy for people who feel very settled in their political theology, and that political theology maybe having a very modern shape to it, to be threatened by this retrieval project of going back and reading not just Calvin, but also reading John Witherspoon, Charles Hodge. And I very much like that they affirm, no, this is a good thing to have a renewed interest in historical theology, rethinking things that we've assumed for many decades now. And so I like that a lot.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of suspicion a few years ago at the renewed interest in a more historical view of civil magistrate and church-state relations. Well, and understanding that this is a partial report, right? They're going to come back next year, if the assembly gives them leave to do so, with areas that to further refine, and with some appendices, and I presume a lot more footnotes and interaction. So what are areas in these affirmations and denials that you have questions about, or that you'd like to hear the committee offer further clarification, or areas that you just thought they were, they didn't live up to your expectations?
I can kick us off.
Yes, you kick us off, James.
I can kick you off. All right, so let's start with 4, affirmation denial 4, the last sentence. I imagine we may all agree on this one. So last sentence of 4, we further deny that the Constitution of the PCA allows the civil magistrate to favor in law any denomination of Christians above the rest, has the right to call synods, ensures orthodoxy in the church, or to order worship. I don't think this is correct. So first of all, the standards removed statements about the right of the magistrate to call synods. That was in the original version. But removing a statement does not entail the denial of that statement. So if I asked someone, I said, please show me where the standards say that the magistrate doesn't have a right to call synods, you wouldn't actually be able to point to a section in the standards, because the standards don't address that topic. And if the standards
you
don't
differ with the standards, if you believe that point.
That's right. So I think that that's an error. Also, the language is very strong. It says that the magistrate doesn't have, they deny that the magistrate has the right to call synods. That's a very thorny issue that it's now raised, because that means Constantine couldn't have called Nicaea, means the Parliament couldn't have called the Westminster Assembly. The magistrate did something beyond its jurisdiction. I just don't think there's a reason for them to deny this. You may say it's not prudent, the magistrate shouldn't do it now. I don't believe that myself.
Or even ordinarily.
Oh, totally. But to say that the Constitution of the PCA doesn't allow this is far too strong.
And that would raise questions about, the mayor's prayer breakfast in a town where, or if he has, a clergy council and he's asking the clergy, how should can you issue a statement about this?
That's right.
Is that a synod? I mean, obviously they're not setting forth doctrine, but that the church must subscribe, but they are issuing a statement. They're coming together. So are we saying that the mayor of Sullivan County couldn't invite me to be on the pastor's council for Sullivan, if there is such a thing? I don't know. That is a curious wording there.
Very strong.
Any other questions, or areas you think that they may need to come back when if they're given leave to reconvene?
I mean, I have a list. You want me to just work through my list?
Well, yeah, maybe let me just hit the high points. I understand you've been invited on several other podcasts, so you may want to
save some.
keep some of your powder dry, but just give us the juiciest.
Just give you the juiciest. Okay, well, I'll give you another one. Let's look at the end. Actually, they're all in a row here, so it's very convenient. Let's go to the end of number 5, denials for number 5.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the last sentence. Whatever latitude may exist regarding the magistrate's posture toward false religion, it does not extend to the persecution of persons. Agree. Right? Definitely not. The 23.3 denies that. The coercion of conscience, absolutely not. The molestation of peaceful religious assemblies, no. Or the exclusion from public office. Well, that's a stretch. Well, sure, I agree. A religious test for office may not be a good idea right now. But denying this as something in principle that's allowable does not line up with 1788. I mean, the states at that time, including the Presbyterians, supported religious tests for office.
Whether Protestant or theist or
yes, yep.
Judeo-Christian.
That's right. So I go ahead.
Please go ahead.
No, I think I've made the point. I just don't think that there's warrant to deny this. I think that should sometime in the future, 100 years, 1,000 years, who knows how long major revival next year, and America becomes Christian, but there's still a minority of non-Christians, and we say, no, we actually want Christians to be the ones who are ruling, and we're going to have a religious test for office. That would be fantastic and wonderful, and certainly not against a principle that's in the 1788 standards. The Presbyterians of that day, in fact, supported these sorts of tests for office.
And that raises an important question that has come up in my Presbyterian, and I assume others, that when we receive and adopt the Westminster Standards as our confession of faith, full subscription, except for any area that we've been given an exception, are we receiving and adopting as it was originally intended by those men, or, and this gets to what is meant by in the space of 6 days, of course, as well, but then, or are we adding our own nuance and as words have changed meaning, as society has, as the Overton window has shifted one way or the other? Because when I read that, it's, well, those men in 1788 certainly would not have wanted to say you couldn't exclude someone from office based on his deism or his popery. But now the assembly will, I presume, receive a report that would deny that. Now, that doesn't bind anyone's conscience. It's the sentiments of these 8 or 10 men. How do we receive and adopt the confession of faith and the catechisms? As they were originally meant, or as we might reinterpret them?
As originally meant. I will go out of my way to affirm, yeah, as originally meant. Otherwise, you end up with kind of a living constitutionalism, which is just no way to govern anybody. Yep. Anyone else have any thoughts on that section? Anyone disagree with that? Disagree with my disagreement?
No, I agreed with you on that, and in particular, if you take a look at it, I think the flow of the sentences leading to that last one is an important one. So just to drop back a little bit, trying to find a good place, you might just have to start at the very first. Nevertheless, we deny that the civil magistrate's responsibility towards religion entitles him to override the protections the confession explicitly affirms. So they're saying we're drawing this directly out of the text of the confession as amended, namely that he may suffer any person upon pretense of religion or infidelity to offer indignity, violence, abuse, injury to any other person whatsoever, is bound to protect the person and good name of every person under his care without distinction, and to ensure order and all religious and ecclesiastical assemblies be held without molestation or disturbance. Westminster Confession of Faith 23.3. Now, they're pointing us directly to the text of Westminster 23.3. Yes, most of that language is drawn out of there. However, as you take a look at the two kind of inflection points of 1646 and 1788, Neither of those contexts would the language of the original confession or the modified version reflect a pluralistic society. The society was pluralistic to the degree that there were Catholics and Protestants, and that was basically it. And even in America in particular, that was more the case. Yes, you had Jewish enclaves, you had some very few Muslim, no knowledge of really any religions outside of historic denominations of Christendom. So that's very important then to keep that language in mind as you go on to the next sentence. Whatever latitude may exist regarding the magistrate's posture towards false religion, which I have a problem then that they're connecting directly to language that really, and it's 100% agree, originalists in how we deal with the U.S. Constitution, originalists is how we do with the PCA's Constitution. Obviously, the second's more important than the former, but both of them should be near and dear to our hearts. That really is taking it out of its historical context, and there's not really an animus imponentis in 1973 or 1788 that would allow you to say they explicitly had a more pluralistic set of religious options when this language was either made, adopted, or modified. So that's kind of an insertion into the interpretation that I find problematic, and also the language of exclusion from public office. You could theorize, I'm not saying I advocate for this, but in the founding of the country till, for at least 100 or so years after, you did see religious tests that, as has been pointed out, Presbyterians were in favor of. So there's actually some historic arguments against this interpretation of 23:3 if they want to make the argument that no, according to the Bible, as we understand it, you should not exclude persons from religious office on the basis of religious convictions. You're free to make that argument. I really don't think you're free to make that from 23:3. You're eisegeting that into the text. It's not in the original, it's not in the context in which it was made. It's not clear to me there are any statements in 1973 in which that was foreseen when we adopted the confession. So I find that whole chain of reasoning there to be reading our pluralistic context into 23:3, and I just don't find that to be compelling.
I completely agree, and I've more textual evidence to support that would be Westminster Larger Catechism 108.
Hmm.
A big deal. So the Americans do review the larger and shorter catechisms, and they make a change to Westminster 109. So this is the sins forbidden in the second commandment. And they remove the statement that says tolerating a false religion is a sin. So now you have freedom to believe. If it may be a sin, it may not be a sin to tolerate a false religion. So that's free. That doesn't affirm that it's not, it just provides liberty on that issue. They do not change the corresponding positive duties that are required by the second commandment. And remember, we've already affirmed in this study report that the moral law binds the magistrate. So this is a duty that the magistrate has as magistrate. And here it is, the end. Ryan's helpfully highlighted it. So it includes the disapproving, detesting, opposing all false worship, and according to each one's place and calling, removing it, and all monuments of idolatry. This is not compatible with religious pluralism. So we have two statements here which appear to be in tension, 23:3 and 108. Many of us have proposals about how these ought to be harmonized, but one thing we can't do is affirm one to the exclusion of the other. However you interpret 23:3, it has to maintain the positive duties of the magistrate to oppose false religion. And same goes the other way. However you interpret 108, it has to take into account 23:3. We can't simply jettison one and say, well, this is the one that I think is more authoritative. Okay. All the standards are the standards, not just the confession. All three documents are our standards. And it does seem
and they
to me,
interpret one another, or at least that's how I understand it. They interpret each other.
Yes. Sort of like the analogy of the standards, right? Like the analogy of scripture.
Well, yes. But I could see that, one might, and I think they get to this later on in the various views, that you can have a generally Protestant, confessionally Protestant society where Protestants are tolerated, whether that includes non-denominationals and high church Episcopalians, we can discuss later when we're amending the Constitution. But but I think that's how you can harmonize these two.
Yep. Yeah, I
How do you
think
as
that's
your
right.
county in Florida, I think, James, when the people, when the Mohammedans wanted to build a mosque, they came to the zoning board and they said, "We don't want no mosque in our town. We don't want a mosque in the center of town."
Yep. And 108 would say that didn't happen in my county, but one nearby. And 108 would say, "Nice job.
Mhm.
Nice job." Now, what I think 23.3 forbids is, for example, if Ken should hear a rumor that a Muslim has moved downtown and goes to his apartment and starts egging it. Okay, the magistrate must, arrest Ken for doing that. Okay, the magistrate also can't just say convict because someone has been labeled, let's say, a Muslim. That doesn't mean the magistrate can't create laws that order society so that basically it suppresses a false religion and lifts up and gives prominence to the true religion.
Yeah,
Which
make it very inconvenient to
Very
practice
inconvenient.
another religion.
That's right. Yep.
Well, any others that you wanted to highlight that you're hoping for greater clarity, or areas that they may have missed the mark in your view, or
Yes,
misunderstood?
it's the next one, and it was a perfect transition. So this is
Okay.
the last sentence of the denial in 6. So we further deny the right of the Christian magistrate to engage in persecution. Agree. Can't persecute. Suppression or the disenfranchisement of citizens on the basis of religion. I would put this in the category of confusing.
Because what is persecution?
So persecution would be basically the unjust treatment of someone on the basis of religion. So you can think of a lot of abuses, where a magistrate says, "Oh, I'm following the second commandment," and then you hear the story and you think that was totally out of line. Like everything about that was just totally wrong, right? That would be persecution, right? Hunting people down merely because you hear that they're, all sorts of stuff that would fall into abuse there. So you can't just straight up persecute someone for their
But is
religion.
it persecution if I'm the chairman of the zoning board or the licensing board, and we don't want non-Protestants to
Mhm.
be operating liquor stores in this county, or we
That
don't
would-
want non-Protestants owning property in this county?
very owning property. Well, I'll tell you what the Presbyterians did do in New Jersey. How about that?
Right.
So
Right.
in
Yeah.
New Jersey in 1788, right? Same Presbyterians that are approving this, right? The only people who had civil rights were Protestants. That's it. If you weren't Protestant, you were not guaranteed civil rights. You may be given it, but you were not guaranteed explicitly in the New Jersey Constitution. And again, I think this statement is ambiguous, but it seems to me that this is denying exactly what the Presbyterians who voted for 1788 standards did in the state where they arguably had the most influence. I'm not saying we should do that today. Okay, this is not an argument for that. It sounds like a really bad idea, actually. But is it that the magistrate doesn't have this right? Well, you certainly can't draw this from 23.3, which is what they cite as the reason for it. That is not the purpose of 23.3.
Well, Ken, what do you think? Is it appropriate to say something like this in our current context? The citation or the reference to 23.3 above, notwithstanding, is this still perhaps a helpful statement, even if a very contemporary look at it?
Yeah, I think that there is a lot of intricacy here, especially as we're re-going over the history of the Presbyterians back in the 1700s. I mean, there is a lot of study that has to go into this, and James is relaying a lot of history that I've never heard of, and so I would be interested for them to expound on this as they went back, or they're coming back next year. I don't know how that works,
Maybe.
because don't we have to approve
Maybe.
them to do this again? Like, don't we have to
Right.
approve
We would
it?
have to extend
Yeah.
their remit. So
if they're going to do that, I would like to understand a little bit more what they mean in this statement. And And as well, I rarely throw eggs if it's not in an egg toss competition.
And certainly not at the house of a
Well, I hope
Mohammedan.
I'm not throwing eggs. I'm just presenting the reasons why I think it's ambiguous, just to be clear.
Yeah. Yeah, and remembering that this is their partial report, they want to come back. So our hope is that we're helpful and respectful in these. And did you have something about 7 that you wanted to highlight as well as, or?
Well, I wanted to give my answer to the question you asked a second ago. If they change this to, we deny that it's prudent for the Christian magistrate to engage, let's say they have a right to persecute, they do not, and deny that it's prudent to disenfranchise. No, totally. You know what I mean? Or we do not support, but they say they deny the right. And that's rights language is all, anyone who's looked into this knows what right language is. Squishy, okay, but it can have and usually entails very strong obligation against, right? So yeah, I'd say something like that.
That's helpful.
I think that was the. Oh, I have one more.
Yeah,
it may go into a point of the report we're not looking at, but I'll briefly mention that at various times, 1788 is kind of construed as being against the suppression of blasphemy. So let me pull that up. So, for example, this would be page 2715. Starting on line 25. So where the original version of the Westminster Standards directed the magistrate to suppress blasphemies and heresies, the revision prohibited him from interfering in the least in matters of faith. So the way that this contrast is put up is that, well, if you say that he can't interfere in matters of faith, then he cannot suppress blasphemy. And I just wanted to point out that this seems like it's saying that they denied the right of the magistrate to suppress blasphemy, when we still in America have blasphemy laws on the books. The Presbyterians argued for the magistrate to punish blasphemers. So I think that's another example of, I'm trying to align their interpretation of 1788 with the actual historic realities of what Presbyterians supported at the time. As far as suppressing heresies, I think that the magistrates should suppress heresies. I mean, but the reason is the word suppress is a very broad word, right? If you said burn heretics at the stake, obviously not. If you said lock up heretics in prison, obviously not. Do I wish that Trump would suppress Paula White? Please suppress Paula White. That I'm looking for this to happen, right? Remove her from her very prominent position and suppress her influence, because right now he's lifting up her influence. The language that John Witherspoon uses is discountenance, right? I wish the magistrate would discountenance heresy. So some of these big words like suppress have such a broad meaning. I wish they were more specific about particularly what they think 1788 forbids. If they said burning heretics at the stake, I mean, great argument for that. But there's lots of other particular ways that the magistrate, depending on the context, may actually have a duty to curtail the influence of heresies, because all Christians, all men, have a First Commandment duty, right, against heresy, and so we all have a duty, and when as befits our fate, place, and calling, to try and keep heresy from spreading. That's just what it means to honor God's law. So I think that's too wide-ranging, and I would like to see more in the report about the positive duty that the magistrate does have towards blasphemy, heresy, false religion, idolatry. The magistrate has some duties to stop those things in one way or another. And we don't have many, if any, positive statements about what the magistrate should do to curtail the influence of these things that are deleterious to humanity, because they're against the nature of man, against the moral law.
And that's an important qualification you gave. According to their several places and stations, that all of us are to suppress heresy, idolatry in different ways, depending
Right.
on, it may just be that the way you do it as a parent is make sure that when you make sure you don't buy the Jesus Storybook Bible or something like that, because that has Second Commandment violations. But if you are a church officer, well, the way that you suppress heresies and idolatry, well, maybe you take down some pictures in the children's wing, or you have them painted over, or and if you're a magistrate, there are going to be other ways to do that. I think you're right that it would have been helpful, and perhaps if they are given another year, they will.
Yeah.
They'll come to that, and
Yep.
invite ministers to pray before the court opens or the
Yeah.
council opens. But I think there's probably more concrete ways that these men could think of. Well, in what time we have left, I wonder if we can talk about Roman numeral number 4. Unless, Ken, did you have something, or Scott?
Yeah, I had just a few things right quick to touch on.
Yeah.
I'd be pretty brief. The first one is actually the first denial under Affirmation Denial 1. It would really just be one word changed. I agreed with the sentiment of what they were trying to do. But the language as we find it now is, nevertheless, we deny that civil government can accomplish the redemptive work that belongs to Christ alone. I agree. I think it should be changed to should accomplish. And the reason for this is I'm viewing this not just through a systematic theological lens, in which I agree with their point, but from a historical standpoint, there are a lot of instances when civil authority was used to further the cause of Christ. You think about Constantine and the Nicene Creed. You think about the magisterial Reformation, and James Davidson Hunter, in his excellent book To Change the World, talks about how in the Protestant Reformation, you didn't just see men preaching the gospel. You saw men preaching the gospel, and those who with social influence then took that and worked that down into the various areas of society. You think also about the history of missions. We think about missions in the context of the post-19th century evangelical missions movements. So you think about John G. Payton and others, where churches voluntarily, as kind of a private exercise of religion, sent men and women into other countries in order to proclaim the gospel. I think that's great. You can see that throughout history with the Boniface move and monasticism in Germany and other places. But you also do see a lot of instances of Charlemagne and others where state power was used to transform great swaths of what would later become known as Christendom. So I'm not arguing with what they're trying to say here. I just think they should nuance it a little bit, because I could see someone trying to attack this, saying, well, historically, what do you do with Constantine? What do you do with Charlemagne? What do you do with Frederick the Wise? For both theological, practical, and missionary improvement. You also look at the Westminster Confession of Faith, which was called by the civil magistrate, in which, if I remember it properly, had to be approved by Parliament. So I think just slightly tweaking the language here would be useful. I don't know if anybody else would agree or disagree with that before I go on to the one or two other things. All right.
Well, as Mel Duncan would say, proceed.
Yes. Yes, we always listen to Uncle Mel. So on Affirmation Denial 4, to go back to the top part of the denial, in defense of my brethren who would be establishmentarians, I'm not an establishmentarian, but I actually do think, similar to the conversation that we had with James about misreading parts of the confession and the catechisms going together, I think there's a similar one here, the denial. Nevertheless, we deny that the Westminster Standards, so that encompasses the catechisms, as modified and adopted by the General Assembly of 1788, embraced by the PCA as its subordinate standard in 1973, and interpreted by its Book of Church Order, allow for the establishment of the church by the state, BCO Preliminary Principle 1. Now, okay, so the argument here is not just that the text of the confession, but the Westminster Standards, as we amended them and then interpreted by the BCO, do not allow for the establishment of religion. I'm a Kuyperian. I believe in a Christian influenced state. I don't believe in establishing particular churches or denominations. But the one thing that you'll notice if you look then at the bottom of the paragraph is their textual justification. is Westminster Confession of Faith 23.3, amending 1646. 23.3, Westminster Confession of Faith 31, omitting 1646, Westminster Confession of Faith 31-2. One thing that they left out was Westminster Larger Catechism 191, which that is the prayer and petitions, the petition, what do we pray for in the second petition? The 1788 Assembly left in language that's very significant there in the second petition, which is Thy kingdom come, acknowledging ourselves and mankind to be by nature under the dominion of sin and Satan. We pray that the kingdom of sin and Satan may be destroyed, the gospel propagated throughout the world, the Jews called in, the fullness of the Gentiles brought in. Here's the key line: the church furnished with all gospel officers and ordinances, purged from corruption, countenanced and maintained by the civil magistrate. Now, in the original context, that language of the civil magistrate, that we're praying that God would use the civil magistrates to countenance and maintain the church and the ministers who are the gospel officers, that would have the original force of supporting them financially. Two things that I would point to in support of this originalist interpretation of this. Number one, if you look at the Westminster Directory for Public Worship, and I know that's all kind of in the air as we're thinking about it, one of the things that you'll find that's missing is tithing in the original formulation, because tithing was something that was really recovered later on, particularly in the Free Church of Scotland tradition, because the state, through its taxes, paid for all the work of the church. And so there was the giving of alms and things like that. But you don't find the same sort of emphasis on tithing in those traditions where state money and power go to fund ministers. That's the logic also, too, behind the great ejection that happened in the 1660s after King Charles came back to the throne. Well, the new King Charles. So there's that. The other thing I would point to is I was doing some graduate studies at Westminster Seminary and asked Chad Van Dixhoorn, who is, I think, the living legend, the living authority on the text of the confession. I asked him about this, and he said, yeah, that would basically equate in the original to pay the salaries of ministers. So here we have an area where the larger catechism was left alone about countenancing and maintaining gospel officers. I'm not an establishmentarian, but if I was, I would appeal to that and say, I'm just agreeing with the language that's still in the confession. So I think they really need to nuance this and work this, that if they're going to exclude establishmentarianism on the basis of the standards, I think they really need to explain the presence of 191 and countenance and maintain.
And they may have understood it differently when they adopted it, right? Than 1644 or 1643.
That's a little tougher because, I mean, Witherspoon himself argues for an established church in his lectures on moral philosophy and in his lectures on divinity as well. And in fact, Witherspoon interprets the phrase "as nursing fathers" as entailing some kind of a tolerant establishment. So not an intolerant one, like no one can be of any denomination besides ours. But the problem here, which is interesting, is preliminary principle 1, right?
Right.
So preliminary principle 1, as we have it today, says no religious constitution should be supported by the civil power further than may be necessary for protection and security equal and common to all others. So I understand there's a tension here between 191 and I think what at least a lot of Presbyterians would have thought in 1788 and the current form of preliminary principle 1. I still think it's overwrought to say it forbids establishment, because you do have that qualification further than may be necessary for protection. It actually allows for a religious constitution to be supported by the civil power as long as it is necessary for protection and security equal and common to all other religious constitutions. And in the context of 1788, religious constitution here, it meant Christian, basically denomination, some form or another, probably Protestant. So I do agree with you there that this is more complex than the study report, I think, would lead you to believe. especially given how often they do cite preliminary principle number 1. Perhaps when the rest of the report comes out, we will see their argument. But I think this is one of the, there's always trade-offs, right? We may have been complaining if they didn't give us a partial report, So there's always trade-offs. But one of the trade-offs here is we're kind of given their conclusions without all the arguments that support them. But anyway, that's just reinforcing, I think, Scott, you're right. I think someone could appeal to 191. And even if preliminary principle number 1 was clearer than it is, then you have, well, which one is more binding, the BCO or the standards?
Or you have to interpret the standards in light of what the BCO says.
Yeah, which I think is their argument here. But is there precedent for that?
Not to my knowledge. That's one of the things I was going to say is I don't think we have delineated in any of the SJC cases or pre-SJC cases that I've seen or in any of the documents a constitutionally established hierarchy between what document you use to read and interpret. There are some other places like the language of other fit governors, which would come from the era when the Westminster was written that they didn't know what to do with the office of ruling elder. And so
Right.
instead of that, they mentioned ministers and other fit governors. Well, we kind of interpret that in light of the teaching and ruling elder language in the BCO. Most people just don't even really consider that as they read through the confession. But that's where what I would like to see is a hermeneutic that is constitutionally integral, that allows all the Constitution to speak. And I think we would be good in this case when we're not considering other forms of Christian nationalism, but considering establishmentarianism. I think it would be wise to treat this the way the Confession of Faith and the Standards treated theological diversity, which is to see it as a consensus document. And so, in particular, what you see, one issue is, are there 2 or 3 covenants? Is it the covenant of grace, covenant of redemption, and then the covenant of works, or is it just the covenant of grace and the covenant of works? Well, the larger catechism says that the covenant of grace is made with Christ and all the elect in him. That leans very strongly in that 2 covenant direction, whereas Westminster Confession of Faith, chapter 7 on the covenant, doesn't mention that language and mentions covenant language directly between God and his people. And if you look at the signers of the confession, you can find both kind of Scottish tri-covenantalists involved in the document approving of it, and also some who were more bi-covenantal. But it was a consensus document, and you could hold to either view, as Burkhoff says, without striking at the vitals. It was a room where there was some wiggle room. Same with super and infralapsarianism. I think it would probably be good if the committee would articulate okay, when it comes to establishmentarianism, we're not in favor of that, but the confession as we have it, or excuse me, the larger catechism would allow for some version of it, while the preliminary principle, the BCO, puts some kind of guardrails on going too far with it and allow us to have a more broader range of options and not to try to exclude all establishmentarianism. I say that as someone who's not establishmentarian, but I don't think they should be excluded on the basis of either scripture or the confession. I think we should allow room for them at the table.
I definitely agree. I'm not establishmentarian either, but I agree with that.
Whenever I am received into a new presbytery, I bring up countenance and maintained and explain this is what I understand by that, and it's up to the court to determine is that within the bounds of what countenance and maintain means, that he should ensure that the church is able to meet. This does not mean financial support. I don't believe that he should be giving financial support to the church. But then you get into issues like that payroll protection program from what was it? I guess that was the Wuhan flu era. And I suppose you can still search on ProPublica how many and which churches received tens of thousands of dollars in free money printed straight off of Donald Trump's inkjet.
Well, I mean, also you get tax exemptions, right? I mean, so that is the
not insignificant.
Yeah, maintaining like financially, that's a financial maintenance.
Yeah. Well, Ken, I know you said you had to go. Any thoughts before you You go eat the dinner that your wife is about to put on the table for you.
No, I think that overall I'm pleased with a lot of that's come out of this. I had heard rumors that nobody was going to like this at all. That everyone was going to be mad. And you know what? While I know there's some things that I think need to be clarified, and there might even be some disagreements, I do think this is helpful to address a lot of what's going on, because the spectrum is just so large. And I heard a brother who was arguing originally against this study committee and then changed his mind on the floor of GA during the debates. He realized what the other churches that were not in his region were dealing with this kind of mentality of Christian nationalism. And so he was all in favor of it, and I know he's pleased with what's come thus far. But it's not complete, and that's evident. So, and I don't know how that goes. If we have to, I know we have to approve them another year. Will people want to approve them for another year? That remains to be seen. If we don't approve them for another year, do we not get any answers to the questions we have?
We just have to invite David Strain and Guy Waters on a podcast to give us those answers.
Just put them up front at the GA and let the floor ask them the questions.
Yeah. I want to also end with this. This was such a hard project. I mean, this is a really, really hard project. And I mean, kudos to all the men who worked, through probably some pretty significant differences.
And it was a fairly broad committee.
Yeah.
I mean, there's people on there that I don't know, but I know there's people on there that have differences of opinion on this subject, and they were able to come up with this document. I think, was it Scott? You reminded us this is probably a consensus document. There's some areas that we're not going to agree with completely.
Yeah, and also to express my appreciation to the committee. Think about not only the difficult polarizing era in which they're doing this work, but also think about the diversity that they have to try to bring together a consensus upon. Like if you look at 1646, the Presbyterian and Reformed faith, yes, you have a lot of differences within the assembly, but it's a pretty homogenous sort of group that's coming together. You look at 1788 and the differences in the wings of Presbyterianism at that time, not nearly as broad and diverse as they are today. You think about the different political philosophies that are mentioned in the paper that they're trying to navigate through, and all the different social pressures in America, secularism. So I really applaud them for producing a high quality document, given the various strands that currently make up the big tent of Presbyterianism in general, but the PCA in particular, on political theology. So I think they're doing a great work so far, and looking forward to seeing the finished product.
Well, very well said. Scott Cook, Ken Wojnarowski, and James Baird, thank you for your time and your insights and the charity with which you approach this project.
Thanks for having us on.
Yeah.
Thank you, brothers.
Thank you. Because Ryan is mean and he's racist.
Thanks for joining the conversation on the Westminster Standard, which is the podcast of Jude 3. For more information or to support our work at promoting confessional renewal within the Presbyterian Church in America, please visit our website, jude3pca.org. Join us again next time. I'll talk to you then.